Hello, everyone, and welcome to DRJ's webinar series. I'm John Seals with Disaster Recovery Journal. A big thanks to today's sponsor, Recovery Point. We've got a great topic lined up, the cyber recovery gap, what your backups aren't telling you. A perfect topic considering October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Before we dive in, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded. We'll send you the link tomorrow so you can rewatch it or share it with your colleagues. You're in listen-only mode, but we definitely want your questions. Just drop them in the Q&A panel in the GoToWebinar tool, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. Now, let's get back to today's topic around around the cyber recovery gap. Today's presenters are Jeff Judy and Matthew Goddard. Jeff has more than 2 decades of experience in system architecture and administration, with a particular focus on virtualized solutions. He designed, built, and deployed Recovery Point's cloud environments and has extensive experience with a broad range of storage replication and backup technologies. Matthew brings more than 20 years of product management experience in cloud-based security and automated resilience and recovery solutions. He is the backbone of the technical infrastructure for the resiliency management platform that drives Recovery Point's flagship managed resiliency service offering. And with that, I'll hand things over to Jeff to kick us off.
Thanks, John. And thanks everyone for having us today. Today we're talking about the cyber recovery gap. We're going to talk about what your backups aren't telling you.
So actually, I think, Jeff, I'll start us off just a little bit about Recovery Point. So we're a pure play provider of disaster recovery and cyber resiliency services, where our focus is to ensure that our clients' businesses will recover after disaster strikes. And we do that by providing expertise in all aspects of data recovery, covering DR, cyber, right, backup services, talk about today, all delivered in high availability architectures, following security best practices. And of course, we deliver all of our services through our own bespoke recovery tier 3 data center. And we've been recognized for the last 10 consecutive years by Gartner as the leader in the disaster recovery space for our ability to execute on recovery solutions that meet our clients' recovery time and recovery point objectives. And we support technologies across the gambit, right? IBM mainframe, IBM Power, AIX, x86, virtual, physical, as well as clients running hybrid cloud solutions, right? They all fit into our DR and cyber resiliency services. So let's talk about the risks, right? And it starts with something that I think we're all aware of, but it's an important reminder and always warrants repeating, right? Cyber attacks are an ever-present threat in today's digital landscape, and every company is a digital company with data as its lifeblood. No companies that don't have some form of dependency, right? And we continue to see attacks on those dependencies amounting to significant business impacts. Earlier this year, UK retailer, right, Marks and Spencer suffered an attack in April, I think it was, caused disruptions for ordering products that lasted well into the summer. Ingram Micro suffered an attack just in July, large one that impacted their ability to process orders for several days. Now, they were able to restore their systems and continue normal operations after that, which is good, but could have been a lot worse, right? And we'll talk about why they were able to do that as well. And it could be worse, like another UK logistics company, actually, KNP, they had to shut down their doors after 158 years due to ransomware attack against them. They couldn't afford to pay the ransom, didn't have adequate backups to recover from, so they had to cease operations, right? So, okay, but like, what if our company can pay the ransom? Well, you wouldn't be alone, right? Because 81% of companies that did that, did get hit, did exactly that, right? But the big secret that they don't tell you is that 1 in 3 of them that paid still couldn't fully recover their data. So either they don't actually get the proper keys, from these honest crooks, right? Or the decryption process is just broken, right? So even if you do pay, right? The cost of that data breach is just above 10 million within the US. And that's typically because of the companies being attacked or left with no other options. And this is particularly when 93% of the attacks have a component targeting the backup infrastructure itself, right? So what it comes down to is preparation, right? And it comes down to being prepared. We find that many of our clients and prospects we speak to are not properly prepared to recover from an event. And unfortunately, the reality of the ransomware is it's not if, but when a company is going to be the target of an attack, right? Gartner's found 70% of companies are poorly positioned to deal with these attacks. And a number of those have found that are suffering from mirages of overconfidence with the way they're ready to react. And honestly, what a lovely way of saying sort of delusions of grandeur, right? When it comes to backups and recovery. And it's not just that these companies are not taking backups, right? Almost all of them are, right? But with the cyber attacks targeting those recovery capabilities super aggressively, so it's just another avenue that needs to be protected. And we work with Veeam really closely as being a gold partner of theirs. And in their data protection trends report, they're showing 3/4 of companies are facing failed recoveries after a cyber attack. And that's just a lot of hard work, right? Leading up to that point, amounting to not being able to use your backups when they're honestly needed the most. Right? So, Jeff, with all that sort of being said, can you take us through sort of some of the approaches and methodology that's going to help our audience be on the favorable side of these percentages in the future?
Yep. Thanks, Matthew. And, not to pile on, but like even it was in January this year, but my local hospital was taken down by a ransomware attack. So like our local ER was down for a couple of weeks. You couldn't really get into, if you had a true emergency that you could get in there, but anything else, you were waiting for days before you could see a doctor. And so, that kind of brings you into what is an effective cyber resiliency? And, this is a common sense statement: proactive measures before a breach, not reactive actions during it. And that's really because you're not trying to build resilience in the middle of a cyber attack. You want to prepare for it long before the alarms go off. And you're not trying to mitigate risk by reacting to it. You want to prevent the exposure through anticipation and being ready. So, like I said, it's common sense, but there's a lot of companies that still have no plans, never tested, or they consider that backups good enough. But just having that green check mark or that successful nightly backup job in your console isn't good enough. We find that these legacy recovery models are failing to meet and beat modern threats. Furthermore, cyber recovery time, and your recovery point and objective expectations are fundamentally different. And so your preparedness will impact the success and times significantly. Oh, sorry about that. Let me get back to that slide. So today we're going to focus on ensuring that you have recovery validated backups, but I want to take a minute to review the overall approach to cyber resiliency. So you have the prep, the recovery, and the remediation. And what we want to really focus on is maximizing your time investment in everything in green on this slide. Your disaster recovery budget should be focused on tabs 1 through 3. So you want to invest in the preparation so that you don't spend your team's time, talents, and budgets on being in scramble mode during a recovery. The goal is being to minimize damage from a cyber attack. Some of the things that we want to focus on are, and we're going to talk about in detail, are threat scanning and backup validation. That's continuous validation, which is going to deliver proactive resilience. You can turn your backups into a reliable core layer of your cybersecurity defense strategy. We're going to talk at length about this, but maintaining a clean room recovery environment. That's an isolated restoration zone for your systems. And you want to integrate your incident response and disaster recovery plans. They're two different kind of things, but they run in parallel. So you want your response, your incident response, and your recovery teams to be in alignment. And then certainly very critical, and it's kind of a basic thing these days, is ensure that your backups are immutable. You want to make sure that you have an offsite copy and that it can't be deleted if a cyber attack occurs. And then finally, automation detection. So containment workflows using security orchestration, automation, and response capabilities. And then conduct your quarterly tabletop exercises to simulate a real attack. That's going to help you close the gaps in your disaster recovery plan. And as things change in production, you can make those adjustments along the way because you're continuously running tabletop exercises, so you can discover what's changed in production and then make those changes over time. So I'm gonna go ahead and just build out this anatomy of attack slide actually all the way. Cyber attacks are the #1 event. So I want to take a look at, what is the anatomy of attack here? Cyber attacks have brought an evolution to your traditional disaster recovery approach. And I think it was CrowdStrike, Matthew, who coined the term democratization of destruction these days. And that's really the adoption of adversarial artificial intelligence. So you now have things like ransomware as a service out there. You'll have businesses that find the breach, access the company's environment, maybe reconnaissance, gathering accounts and passwords, but then they're not doing anything with it other than selling it to malicious actors who don't want to do that legwork, but want the access and the accounts, and then can carry on with extortion and the encryption tactics. So adversarial AI has boosted speed and scale of cyber attacks. And then, so when you look through the approach here, you've got a day 0 initial breach, and that's things like advanced phishing campaigns, which they are the most common initial attack vector for malware and credential theft. And with generative AI, you're talking about adversaries crafting much more compelling emails that look real, they're free of grammatical errors, and it's really very difficult from our perspective, from the human eye, to detect that what's a genuine communication from what's a phishing email. CrowdStrike also said that there's an uptick of 52% this year versus 12% last year of click-through rates on phishing emails. So just to say that they're getting craftier and better at what they're doing. Other ways they get in are rapid exploitation of vulnerabilities. Certainly zero-day exploits. Microsoft just had, I think, 6 zero-day exploits they patched yesterday, and then insider threats as well. So you have to deal with insider employees that may be disgruntled, looking to do malicious activities. So then you have day 1 reconnaissance and really day 2 through 10 infiltration, and that's the attack is really looking to expand, find critical data sets, escalate their privileges so they can move around your network undetected. And another common attack vector is your backup. So backup infrastructure holds a blueprint of all of your critical systems and applications. It's going to hold the crown jewels of your company, and it's going to give them a map to the reconnaissance efforts. And certainly once they've mapped out what the crown jewels are for your company and they can launch the attack, they're going to first make sure that they can delete your backup, so you have no alternative but to pay the ransom. At that point, backups become critical, very critical if you're not even thinking about them. And if you don't have an offsite copy, or if you can't restore from those backups because they didn't work, you're toast. So at this point, we're going to take a quick poll question. We want to hear from you guys, from everyone here, about, does your organization have an offsite copy of your backups that has been tested with a full recovery in the last 6 months? So John, give me a yes, we're good. Oh, cool, there we go. So does your organization, so we're getting about 50-50, a little more on the yes side than the no. You see that, Matthew? Looking good.
Yep.
Okay, cool, that's good
Well,
news.
in the direction that we want.
Yeah, going in the right direction. Excellent. So, we can come back to the slides and we'll take a look at, backups aren't the same as recovery. There we go. The danger zone is being complacent and assuming that having that nightly successful backup is good enough and running your annual DR test equals recovery ready. But as I stated, like, legacy recovery models are failing to meet and beat the new cyber threats. So it's time to level up your recovery approach. And first, you need to define what is success. Well, it's having clean backups and that have been recovery tested and orchestrating that recovery. What the focus is on cyber resilient recovery, meaning designing your disaster recovery plan to work with the security incident response plan. So you want to restore from clean, validated backups, call it green, clean, and confidently validated. Restore into a clean room, and then you allow your forensics analysis teams to complete their review before you reconnect systems to the production network. And of course, you want to be able to communicate the restoration statuses. Matthew, I know making backups is just the basic step, it's step one, but what are the best practices?
Yeah, sure. So we can start by extending those traditional capabilities, and I think the audience heard of the 3-2-1 rule, right? Having 3 copies of our data, 2 different media types, and 1 offsite copy, right? And that's what helps start making sure that our backups are going to be there when we need them, right? Recovery point, we sort of extend that also with an extra 1 and 0 on the end. So we talk about also having an air-gapped copy with immutability, or tape vaulting, get it completely separated from the network completely. And ultimately that equates to then no errors as a part of the testing that we're having, because we're continuously doing it. And because disaster cyber events are going to affect the backup infrastructure itself, right? Making sure that we have those offsite copies and they're immutable and can't be written more than once is a strong first step in ensuring that we're protected. So I'd say the poll was great that people are doing the testing, and what we'd asked is to start taking a look at making sure you're not just testing the primary copy, right? The one that's quick and maybe local and easy to get to, but also that offsite copy. Right? And if the companies I spoke about earlier, right, had air-gap backups, they probably could have restored a lot of those systems without having to pay the ransom, because obviously paying the ransom is sort of the last choice that anyone wants to have to make.
Yeah. Sometimes you can't pay the ransom. You're prohibited.
Yep, absolutely. Right, lots of factors involved with that. The other thing that we're seeing is that as Jeff sort of alluded to, those avenues that are being used to infect. So when he spoke about the anatomy of the attack, right? The numerous times that protection at the front line of defense, sort of edge of the network, isn't enough to stop these breaches. And plus traditional sort of those extended detection and response software, just not catching all of the, what currently could be dormant threats installed on client systems that we're seeing that are doing that reconnaissance actively. And honestly, further to this, while many of the backup vendors are adding a layer of scanning to the backups, absolutely is a great first step and the way to go. That's also only happening at the time the backup's being taken. So these 0-day threats, if they're identified after the fact by the security vendors and the labs and patches are putting out, you could still have backups with those infections within the data for now until end of time, right? So, and working with our security vendor, we're seeing 82% of companies are finding that extra malware and threat software within their backups, even when all of these other tools are in play. And the reason why we're moving to this is as we talk about and if we go back to our anatomy of attack, the earlier in the attack in the life cycle that we're able to identify these sort of gaps and the problems, the better prepared you're going to be. And when it comes to backups, right, the focus should be making sure that our backups are making it to those offsite secondary locations that we spoke about earlier, so that any threats to the infrastructure are minimized. Of course, making sure that they're able to actually restore properly and aren't corrupted in some way, but also and making sure that once they're restored, they're not going to reinfect everything because there isn't those dormant threats that we're doing the reconnaissance. So this in effect means that we can remediate earlier before the boom and continue business as usual normally without any interruption. So the same way sort of actors are evolving their techniques and the ways to get into the environments, you know, we're evolving the tools that we have at our disposal, and they're continuing to evolve as well. So they're increasingly engineered to enhance recovery readiness by leveraging automation, AI-driven analytics, and orchestration. So backup validation that we've been talking about, increasingly important to cyber resilience. So this is AI detection tools becoming the standard, right, for these backup applications and validation solutions. They can help surface threats that might be missed by the detection tools in production. And we'll dig deeper into that in a minute. The other piece being orchestration, right? So tied to automation, critical component to ensure timely and consistent recoveries can happen with the data and the backups that you have.
And then there's clean rooms too. So, you know, you want a place that you can restore isolated and allow your forensics analysis to run. But you need clean rooms that can be spun up quickly to respond to the incidents and make sure that's network isolated. And then testing and reporting. So, you know, when you're in the middle of a disaster, dashboards and metrics are a necessity to ensure your recovery is on schedule, to check your team's progress in real time and provide status reports to leadership. But metrics also play another critical role. They are your key performance indicators that show that your recovery architecture, your investments into the disaster recovery are driving real financial savings. So when you're informing your leadership team, you can use them to show potential hours of downtime and the cost of the business versus the financial savings from setting up resilience and producing positive outcomes. Metrics are going to ensure that the recovery plan works and that expectations are in line with reality and that you're meeting regulatory compliance requirements as well. So testing and reporting exposes the gaps in the recovery solution. It builds awareness and it helps drive governance towards better approaches to resiliency.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little more detail about sort of those 4 areas of these next gen tools. It's going to help us understand sort of how our backups can be leveraged better. Recovery Point, for example, has a service as an early warning detection to those cyber gaps we've been talking about. We're working to bring sort of the identification of those issues to clients as early in that validation process as possible, right? And it's all automated and hosted within our data center. So as a part of our backup validation service, we're going to be taking clients' backups that are securely stored with us. We're going to fully rehydrate those backups fully, turn on the system, ensuring that there's no problems with the backup itself, right? And there's a reason why the industry says to test those backups, right? The number of times, I talked about earlier, we talked about 75% of them, right? That we've seen clients are in the middle of a test or a DR declaration, and they find their backups just aren't working, right? So before that event and before you need them, right? The earlier you know, if your backup can't be restored, the better chances you can fix it and remediate properly. So once that system is, and we go through that process of restoring it, we're going to scan it for malware and other indicators of compromise, right? And this isn't just signature-based file checks, although that is a part of it, absolutely. But there's also AI anomaly detection and heuristic scans that can identify sort of more characteristics that you should be aware of so you can remediate and address as soon as possible. And of course, full reporting, as we said, these metrics are important. So full reporting on what's good and what's bad for the backups and their content. And by looking within those backups themselves, we really see a convergence of sort of the security and backup teams working together within our clients' environments to ensure protection. And using this information, right, the security teams can review and are able to act sort of with real data and real information, not just hunches.
Yep.
So Before I pass it back to Jeff, actually, to talk about clean rooms and their role, we want to do another poll from the audience and just see like how many of us are scanning their backups for potential threats and like the data inside them today. Oh, 5149. Oh, that's close. That,
Yep.
I mean, that's great. And that's sort of what we were expecting. I think there's some people that have the extra infrastructure and the environment to be able to do that, and those that don't. So I think, Jeff, can you talk to us about sort of if we go back to the slides and the clean room and how those can help with that process of the validation?
All right, so that's good. That looked decent too, about around 50-50 for adoption on scanning your backups for threats too. You know, a lot of vendors are have built-in threat technologies as well. So it's good to run that, to head that off, you know, as a frontline security defense. So I'll talk about a client for this first, because this would have helped them in a big way. But we had a client that had suffered a cyber attack, and they had taken the time to attempt to mitigate. They brought in an incident response third party, and they were rebuilding their infrastructure and working through restoration efforts. And the cyber attack, the bad guys were still in their environment. They hadn't been eradicated, and the compromised systems hadn't been shut down. So they were actually in there monitoring the restoration efforts and could see the team doing the recovery processes, and had sent them another note saying, hey, we actually see you in there. We actually know who your incident response vendor is. And, you know, if you don't cease and desist and pay us the ransomware, we'll further encrypt you. Well, you know, and that went ignored, and the restoration efforts continued, and they were hit a second time, which further set them back to the point of they were down so hard that they had to disconnect everything from the network and, you know, from the internet, shut their business down, and take a look at how these guys were coming into their environment and completely eradicate the attack and the holes in the compromise before they could begin the restoration efforts. You know, so that's to say that a clean room is a part of a critical piece of your cyber recovery efforts. It's not just a stack of servers and switches and a firewall. It's more of a defined workflow within your incident response plan. Yes, you do need that target environment, and you do need it to be isolated, but it's on top of the equipment. You need to have the workflow defined. So think about executing a mock cyber attack, and then you step through the workflow with restoring backups into your clean room. You allow the security team to run forensics, to execute their scans, perform analysis, patch and resolve any discovered vulnerabilities in the restored systems, and then promote back into your mock production environment. You know, that's kind of a basic workflow for a clean room recovery. It's very important to know what to recover per instance, and that instance is clean. Reporting quickly and accurately, because on top of actually restoring in your restoration efforts, because your teams, the company needs to know what systems were infected and what's the closest point that I can recover to. The business needs to understand the amount of data loss and assess the impact to its operations. Part of the clean room is scanning. You must scan because it's dangerous to recover the wrong stuff and not check it. You will reinfect the entire system and potentially have to start over from step one of recovery process. So, you know, clean room, you need equipment, you need an isolated environment, but you need that workflow to understand what actions are being taken by what team and the process. You know, forensics analysis should be built into the actual DR testing process. Run those tools, run the security tools during a test mock exercise. You know, don't wait for an actual incident to occur for your security team to be involved. So I wanted to take a look at after the event. What does a cyber attack recovery timeline look like? And then just walk you through that for a minute here. So you have the cyber attack, you have identification, takes a few hours maybe, invoke response plans, your incident response team, security teams taking into action to actually stop the bleeding in your production environment, shut the infected systems down and isolate them. You have to reach out to your cyber insurance, maybe contact authorities depending on the breach access levels. And then you get into the forensics analysis, rebuilding IT, data recovery process. And you could be looking at something like 24 days of time. And really on average, it's 30-day average time for a full recovery from an event like this. And when you're looking at those steps, if you think about it in terms of implementing that backup validation, implementing automation, clean room recovery, sort of hitting the red button to initiate clean room kind of event, completely automated and orchestrated, you're talking about potentially reducing from 24 days of forensics analysis, rebuild IT, data recovery down to maybe just a day, 2, 3, 4 days to recover all of your data and bring your business back online. So when you think about that though, how do you get there? Like I said, backup validation and automation are going to be key components to take your cyber recovery program to that next level. So Matthew, what would be the proper approach for automation and orchestration?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so as you said, I mean, because of all these moving parts and complexities with recovery, right? The organizations need to be looking at how they can leverage these tools. And I'll say in the recent Gartner IT resiliency survey, the new one actually for 2026, they outlined 68% of organizations have backup software with automation, but only 35% have automated sort of that full recovery of apps and infrastructure. And so recovery point, so for example, use a combination of change management and automation in our and through our resiliency console to support client teams and our own managed services team groups through the recovery of the complex systems and apps. And not only are we automating the recovery of the servers and the applications, but it can also perform validation of those as well. So with being able to manage all aspects of that recovery process is sort of building up through the dependency definitions being used to define what the process is and help to quickly understand the impact that the outage might affect if one happens. Right? Orchestrated recovery through those automation of the system and apps, and I'll talk about a little more in a minute. But also obviously going back to the reporting as well, those like real RTO metrics, right? Step-by-step breakdown to that recovery, so you can quickly understand what sort of your recovery, the critical path is across all your systems and applications and all of your priority tiers that you might have within your organization. So looking at the Gartner stats and stuff, I'm interested in our audience today and seeing, are you using automation to restore your backups? And a few options, either currently, right, planning to in the near future, or just right now there aren't any plans, for whatever reason that might be.
Kind of split, almost
looking
3 ways.
pretty close. We're split on many of the ideals we're talking about today. Very interesting.
I would be curious to understand the not planning to automate. I'd like to dive deeper.
Absolutely. Lots of different reasons why, whether it be budgeting, people, time. That would be one to double click on for sure. Okay. Okay, so when we talk about the automation sort of in implementation, right, we see our clients using the automation sort of in 2 different ways. And there's before the boom that we talk about and the crisis, and after, right? Before, it's things like testing the backups that we've been talking about for successful recovery, presence of threats, right? Making sure that our clean room is operating as expected, verifying dependencies through practical validation exercises, not just ones on paper or through simulations, right? And they also find a lot of undocumented changes that might have slipped past other sort of checks and balances when we look at overall change management processes. So it's always important to find what those gaps are and to close them. And after the boom, so during an actual event, the automation orchestration is used for things like running those same recovery processes that we did through testing, right? Runs through the exact same thing. And if we did our homework, we know that they're gonna work properly, right? Keeping recovery times low, sort of freeing the teams to deal with more critical issues that arise, especially through those in those situations. And honestly, I mean, it's going to be a stressful situation as well, and like people make mistakes. So bringing automation helps take the randomness and those extra variables out of the equation, right? So overall, having that sort of programmatic and repeatable process that you can properly measure against and continuously reflect on and improve is key when it comes to the automation area. And the metrics and reports that you get, you're able to produce before an event, and understand what the recovery looks like to ensure expectations are in line with reality. Like that's great that we have, our RTO objectives, but can we actually meet them? And is it reasonable, right? And with the reporting, when we do meet them, we know that we have the information that ensures that we're meeting regulatory compliance requirements. So, Jeff, can you sort of help start to finish this off where you think the biggest sort of bang for your buck is when it comes to the unknowns and the gaps regarding the backups that we've been talking about today?
Yep. Thanks, Matthew. So I think you said it actually, but this is a continued convergence of security orchestration, automation and response, and disaster recovery operations. So scanning the backups to discover malware is an enhancement to your frontline security operations. As we said, 82% of companies found malware in their backups that the security tools missed. So having that additional layered approach is going to only further enhance your security frontline operations. And then also restoring and validating backups is going to provide proof and assurances that you are recoverable, and it's going to help you close the recovery gap. So regarding what your backups are telling you, this is the playbook that we lay out. First thing is offsite validated backups. Make sure that you follow the 3-2-1-1-0 rule Matthew was presented on. Define your runbooks. Runbooks can be just large text documents at first. Just lay out what the procedures are and what needs to be executed. Take those runbooks, and then recovery automated workflows can be put in place once you know what the procedures are. Automate as much as possible because it's going to help you scale, build efficiencies. And then, of course, make sure that security scanning is part of the entire process for your clean room setup, which when you deploy, make sure that security scanning is part of that, and automated if possible. And then to tie everything together, proper reporting, as we talked about, is really critical because you need to be able to produce metrics, key performance indicators, proper reporting to show that the program is working, you're successful, as well as amongst the teams understanding where your gaps are in your disaster recovery plan. Reporting will help you uncover that, and you can circle back through the process, run it again as changes occur in your production environment. Gaps will open up. Technology changes all the time. There's new threats out there, so you have to be able to adjust. So building out a solid plan like this helps you to be flexible, adjust quickly, and respond quickly, efficiently, and operationally just improve performance across the board for your teams. So Matthew, before we wrap up here, what's one key takeaway that you'd want to leave with everybody?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, look, no industry is safe from these attacks. especially when money's involved, right? And
Yeah.
the groups doing this, they don't care who's affected, right? Jeff talked about the hospital in his area. I mean, my local children's hospital was also hit by a cyber attack and had emergency room services offline for a long time, right? That's horrible. And we don't want anyone having to deal with, these ramifications of being offline. So our CISO has a great motto, and we like to use with our approach when we're helping clients, and that's, if you can see it, you can solve it, right? So my takeaway would be testing continuously, making sure you know what's working and what isn't, so you can close those gaps and recover quickly after an outage, no matter what the reason.
Cool. I like it. See it, solve it. I would say that backup vendors like Commvault, Veeam, Rubrik, all these vendors are really improving across the board with what they're doing, being able to scan and rehydrate backups to make sure that they're validated. You just need to be able to have that offsite copy, keep it immutable, make sure that your backups are validated, those backups that you're going to fall back to, because that's really your last line of defense when you have a very serious cyber attack dealing with a very serious cyber attack. Having those immutable copies of backups are very critical to being able to get your business back online.
That's perfect. Thanks, Jeff. So in terms of where to go from here, right, please feel free to take our quick survey. It covers a lot of what we've spoken about today. And this can be done by the backup or security teams. It'll give a good overview of the gaps that might be present within your own environment. And of course, if you're looking for a more in-depth review, we offer a complimentary ransomware readiness discovery session as well, where we'll work with you to evaluate your current preparedness and risk profile and help look at options for how you can be more resilient potentially. So you can scan the code now. We'll include links in our follow-up emails following today's event. And I think with that, I'll pass it back to you, John, to I think help coordinate some Q&A since I think we have a little bit of time left.
Yes. Okay, I have a question here. If my backups are immutable, should I still look to air gap them?
Yeah, I can
absolutely.
take that.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Sure. Yes. I hate to say it, but it depends a little bit on your situation. Companies that have long retention periods, say some companies have compliance regulations, they have to retain data for 7 years. It's not really economical to keep it on disk or out in object storage or somewhere, and it might make more sense to be able to air gap and archive off to tape.
Okay. How many times a year would you recommend a company conduct a DR test?
Well, it's as many as humanly possible is the best answer. But no, I mean, we're realistically, right, being able to stage and identify sort of based on the tiers in your apps and servers, right, what makes sense. So for a lot of systems, twice a year is a good goal for active teams to be doing that recovery. I'd say more frequently for sort of the higher, more critical apps. And then the techniques that we've been talking about today, though, is just because you're not having the team actively doing the tests doesn't mean that these environments and systems can't still be validated. You still can't make sure that your backups are still healthy and present and still recoverable then even more frequently during that time.
Okay. How does Recovery Point implement a clean room recovery service for their clients?
Sure, I could take that. It's a design based on the business's requirements, first and foremost. So, starting with the readiness assessment would be a good place to get started. But we build up based on your disaster recovery plan, the objectives that you lay out, recovery point, recovery time objectives, to understand what needs to be built, because you might have some components out in the cloud, might have private cloud, still some physical systems. So all these things have to kind of be coordinated. So it's not necessarily, like I said, a stack of servers and switches and firewalls. It could be an availability zone out in Azure AWS kind of deployment, but the overarching workflow has to work for your teams. So it's not a specific thing that you can lay out. You have to work with the company to understand what the risks are, and then design the architecture based on that.
Okay, let me see. Okay, how do organizations prioritize their response efforts following a ransomware attack?
Well, I think I can start with that, Jeff. So I think understanding obviously the assets and what you have within the environment, and a lot of that starts with impact analysis, right? Both from a system perspective as well as a business perspective, making sure that you have understood the risk in terms of what's critical and what's not, and all of that equates into RPOs and RTOs. And then when you take a look at the tools to augment both what's automated and what isn't, that can help you prioritize and direct the teams as to where the effort should be spent.
Yep. I could add on to that. If you were to go out to like NIST's risk management framework, they lay it out where you create a risk register, and you understand the risk of the system or application. So you assign the category to it, and then what's the likelihood of that occurring? Is it low, medium, or high? And then assign an impact level to that system or application being down. So once you have the impact level and the likelihood of occurring times those two objects, gives you a number that or a score basically of where that system and application should lie in the likelihood and impact of the risk to your company. So where do you want to prioritize your efforts? Run an exercise like that to understand what the highest risks are, and then you can focus your effort and time on those things first.
To kind of follow up with that, what would be with your example, what would be a realistic RPO in that scenario?
So with backup validation, your recovery point objectives could be much more aggressive. So the slide I laid out with the after the event and the recovery time up to a 30-day average, if you implement backup validation and you're scanning your backups and validating those daily, just as an example, say you set that up for a daily run, you can reduce your recovery point objective down to say a 24-hour set of data loss. And it depends on the risk level. You could be more aggressive or less aggressive.
Someone asks, if I have a dedicated backup data center for critical systems and applications, would this qualify as a clean room, or do I need to dedicate additional resources within this facility?
I've had a similar question to this one before. So like, it depends. That you don't want to blend infrastructure. Sometimes you're spanning two data centers, and that might be your dev and QA. And you're like, well, I'll use that for my clean room disaster recovery as well. But that complicates the process. Now I understand budgets might kind of dictate what you can and can't do. So I would avoid doing that if that's the way if that's the way you kind of have to have it set up today. Then I would ensure that you've got an actual dedicated environment laid out, and then obviously run through those tabletop exercises to see how your plan is going to work. Matthew, what do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you still need that segregation because and separation of the data, because if what you're restoring ends up being dirty, you don't want it to reinfect things just in another location, especially if it was isolated to one. So that's why you have to assume that without sort of some form of backup validation, you have to assume that what you're restoring is dirty and has to go through a process before it's promoted to an area that it can talk to the internet and be connectable by clients and other applications.
Okay, and there's another question here about if with your strategy, do you have like a minimal viable business amount of data as opposed to doing all of the data, securing all the data?
Well, I would take that back to this risk management framework. So the minimal viable amount of data to run your business is really based on your risk register. Lay it out in just a table format, even to a basic table format. Say, I've got this, CRM database that is critical to my company, and that has to be online. So, obviously the risk is high if that's down. The likelihood of it going down could be high based on how you have it set up. So you want to make sure that that's protected. So, and companies, really most times know what systems are really critical, and they have to make sure that those things are backed up. And then what we're talking about is taking it that next level, make sure that you can recover from those backups, and then bolster your security frontline defenses by scanning those backups for malware. Because you might find something that's been infected that's not launched yet, and you can head off the attack early, before it's ever launched. The attack would be thwarted, as we had in that other slide.
Given clients are trying to avoid vendor lock-in, does RPS find cooperative success working with those companies who may have already implemented an incident response solution with another vendor? So would you focus on backup recovery in cooperation with incident management client silo?
Yeah, absolutely. Many of our clients have partners for and to perform various aspects of that function, especially when it comes to declaration and disasters. And so we work in conjunction with the client and their other managed service providers and other partners to look at that complete sort of end-to-end solution for them.
Yeah, we what I've seen over the last maybe 2 years now is different approaches to disaster recovery are actually running through cyber events where they're not restoring or recovering from replication solutions, but actually recovering from backups. So clients are coming in saying, okay, the replication is okay, but we want to run a cyber recovery test plan, and we want to restore everything from backup. It's going to take longer. And what they'll do is they'll run a tabletop exercise with their security vendor or their security team, and they'll bring Recovery Point in to actually sit there at the table to run through the exercise. So a tabletop is just really talking through scenarios and understanding how the responses are going to play out for companies, or I'm sorry, for teams. And you'll have that tabletop, you'll have that security vendor throw out scenarios in the middle of things. Say, okay, well, you're cruising along, recovering, the network, and then the phone systems go down. What has to happen? So you kind of play out different scenarios, and then they'll say, hey, Recovery Point, they've initiated DR. What's your role? What are you gonna? What processes do you follow? So working hand in hand with the security teams and the third-party security providers is part of disaster recovery.
Okay. Do either of you have anything else you'd like to add?
Immutable backups. Make sure you have them.
And make sure they're recoverable.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining us today. We hope you picked up some great insights. A big thank you to Jeff and Matthew for leading this session, and to Recovery Point for sponsoring today's webinar. You'll be receiving an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. Feel free to watch it or share it with your team. If you have any follow-up questions, just reach out to us here at DRJ. Thanks again. And now this ends today's webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.